Welcome back to States and Kingdoms. Today we're talking about the Beatles live at the BBC, released in 1994. Funny enough, in our lifetimes, there were actually a lot of Beatles releases that were a big deal for us and our family.
That's why I kind of wanted to talk about this. I thought it was really interesting because this came across this when we were listening to it. I was thinking about our experiences, and in the 80s and 90s, it was like a Beatles resurgence. When they released all the Beatles stuff on CD,
Right.
all the albums on CD and past masters, and then in 94 they released this. This really the first new release, Beatles release since I think 77, and it's also the first posthumous release, first Beatles album to be released after John's murder.
Right.
And and then of course the anthologies,
Right.
and all the Beatles Love album and all the things that just it really hasn't stopped since. But
Make it stop.
yeah. But it was really interesting growing up at this time because when the CDs were being released, we were both quite young and
But sentient.
yeah, but I remember listening to them in chronological order because they came out in chronological order. So they each one would come out and our father would just have it on like a lot. Yes. And he really did favor the early ones because he had more nostalgia for those, really. I mean, I think he hadn't listened to them in a long time. That's what I always figured.
Yeah,
I don't know if
gathered
you
the
ever
same.
said that. So we heard all the first 4 albums, a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I really loved them. I mean, so for me, that was always a really special period with the Beatles.
Yeah, you love the early Beatles.
Yes. And this
Is the earlier Beatles.
is the early Beatles. And, and also because of that, I also, our other parent loved the Beatles as well, but also loved late 50s and early 60s rock and roll and, and
So here
things
you
like
get
that.
both.
And because of listening to the early Beatles and that, I really love this because you get to hear them do all these great early rock and roll songs. And it shows just what the scope of music that the Beatles were drawing from was really phenomenal.
Yeah, there's such variety and breadth of styles, and yeah, it's really incredible.
But it is an interesting thing. The 90s were the second best decade for the Beatles, basically. I mean, they had a real resurgence, and tons of younger people started listening at that time.
Yeah.
You had the first new 2 Beatles songs.
Yeah. And the anthologies, I know we're not talking about that, but the anthologies were a big deal.
Yeah, they were.
It was a really big deal. I mean, close to the last, maybe, more or less, not global, but I'll say nationwide TV event. I mean, they were, it was before, streaming stuff. It was before all that, and everyone watched it.
Yep.
More or less.
Yes.
It was a big deal. It was a big deal with the actual, the releasing of the new songs, the TV events, the book.
Yes, you're talking about the anthology a lot now. No, this live at the BBC really kicked it off. I remember this album. It doesn't get a lot of attention. They did release a second part in 2013,
right?
Which is really
Some
just more from the sessions but we did listen to this. It was on, and I've listened to it intermittently since. It's a fantastic document of the Beatles, 63 to 65, but very much 63.
A lot of 63.
And there's they do Carl Perkins, Elvis, Little Richard, Arthur Alexander. They do
and Margaret,
the Everly Brothers, Buddy Holly. There's some of them are really, really great covers. And, there's sort of a side thing about, there's not as much interest anymore in being a song stylist. There's not as much respect given.
Because there's no style.
Well, there's not as much respect given to people that can cover songs and cover a wide range of songs,
right.
and do it with some style.
Everything is like writing. And if you're not writing your own compositions, then you don't get much credit for anything these days.
And I really love bands that do that. I mean, I think it's something that people should. I mean, they still do, of course. There are tons of bands that play covers, but people should do it more. And I think bands that have original songs should do more covers as well. I mean, I don't know. It's just this is so much fun to listen to because of just how much music there is here. You know, I mean, how much, how many different songs there are, other people's songs. So, I mean, being able to hear them do Anne Margaret, next to the Coasters, and all, it's definitely the Beatles. And John's a fantastic voice, of course.
He sounds amazing.
His vocal style is totally formed. He sounds great. He really sings lead.
Like almost everything.
Pretty much everything. Yeah, I mean, he's very much the leader here. But there's some I love a couple of performances. I love George's version of Glad All Over, Carl Perkins song that, I don't know. I mean, you hear it if you listen to Carl Perkins, but
he sounds George sounds surprisingly good. I don't mean that in like a bad way. I just mean early on, considering how early this was, his vocal on that is very confident.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like you tend to think of his later songs as the ones that where he's singing a little bit more expressively.
Dynamically.
Yeah,
he's got a little more vibrato.
But he sounds really good.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Ringo.
Yeah, I think it's I Want to Be Your Man on this. His singing, I mean, it's got some oomph.
Yeah.
And,
it's a real feisty performance from Ringo.
Being able to hear the Beatles without a bunch of people screaming, and things like that. Nice. So your live performances where you can really clearly hear everything is good.
Well, yeah, that's one of the things I was thinking of. I think we said this when we were doing Past Masters. How great it is, just enjoyable it is to just hear them, especially the earlier songs. Because you think of them, I mean, later on, I think people tend to think of them in their prime. But I mean, these earlier, especially so in this case, live performances, but these earlier songs where they're just really like fired up and they're playing together so well. You really hear all of the influences, I mean, obviously, but you hear everything that they've been listening to, all of the hours they've been putting in performing live. They're just so confident and just, they just sound like so strong and so just full and, ready to take over everything.
It certainly is a fascinating period of time for the Beatles. But I just think of it, as a really great resource just for rock and roll. I mean, because we used to talk about this, like if rock and roll stopped existing, you had to recreate rock and roll.
I remember that.
It's kind of like the Time Machine thing from the end with the 3 books.
Yeah,
but,
what 3 books would take?
You're stupid if you take books, if you're trying to reconstruct rock and roll. You fail right there. Duh. No, but, something like, I always thought, take like the first 5 Gene Vincent records.
And more than 3.
Okay, 3. First 3 Gene Vincent records. Or maybe the second, third, and fourth. Yeah, whatever. Or even, something like,
To the Extreme, Vanilla Ice.
The first 3 Ramones albums or things like that. Maybe not just one band, but a Ramones album, a Gene Vincent album.
I understand. I understand where you're going.
It doesn't matter. It's a silly exercise.
It's actually not. We should do a video.
We're doing a video right now, John.
Wait, what?
That's a camera right there. Surprise.
Wait, have you been recording all of these?
Hi, I'm Alan Funt. Anyway. But this album really does give you a great idea of rock and roll. And, you could just listen to this and it's a fantastic resource for
Well, yeah, you could even just take this and go back and then start listening to all of those artists. Right. And then you can start a band.
Well, whatever. I mean, no one will want to hear you, but, there's a lot of great stuff. Johnny Burnett, Lonesome Tears in My Eyes, and, Paul singing the Hippie Hippie Shake, and, the 2 Arthur Alexander songs, because of course they also did Anna on Please Please Me. That's really cool. Yeah. Great versions of those songs. Yeah, there's a lot, they do Buddy Holly. They do the Everly Brothers.
Mm-hmm. Little Richard.
They would not do Gene Vincent.
Chuck Berry.
They even do Elvis, but Gene Vincent they would avoid. They took selfies with him, but they didn't. No, but it would have been interesting for them to do maybe a couple of Gene Vincent songs here. But like we said, the thing that is most interesting to me, just from our standpoint and people our age, is when you listen to this and you remember when this came out, followed by the anthologies and also the CDs. I mean, to me, the Beatles were a living thing. And when we were kids, we watched Hard Day's Night, we watched Help
a lot,
many times. Help even more. It's not talked about that much. How much like the Beatles had that resurgence, and
I think that's a pretty. I honestly think that's a common.
I think people actually, developed a greater respect for them at the time. Even movies like Backbeat.
Yeah, and there was that VH1 made-for-TV movie.
Right, a little
about
later.
About when
Two
Paul
of us.
and John, Paul and John like reconnected in New York one night. It was a thing. It was definitely a thing. I think that's of course, a very common experience for people our age. The Beatles were definitely they were a big influence. I think again.
Yeah, it really did.
I don't think you could deny that.
It did kind of put them front and center again. And I think the people went back and listened to them, as a rock and roll band again around that time.
Yeah.
And I mean, certainly a movie like Backbeat did promote that because it's all about, them doing these things and Dave Pirner.
I don't think the Get Back era, the Get Back documentary era is going to do the same.
Well, I mean, it's obviously the Beatles.
I'll say no more.
New releases all the time, new things, coming out. I mean, there wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
For quite a while. There really, I mean, obviously you actually had individual Beatles releasing things, and there are still two of them out there, but, there weren't Beatles releases.
Right. Good point.
Is the point. Thank you very much. The Beatles playing early rock and roll. Can't go wrong with that.
I don't know what else you can say. It's just,
nothing.
Really fun to listen to. And nothing else. Okay. Thank you so much for watching our brief discussion of the Beatles live at the BBC. Make sure to let us know what you think of this record in the comments. Make sure to like this video and please subscribe to States and Kingdoms, and we will see you next time.